O king, since you have asked me about our friends and relatives in the city of Dwarka, I will inform you that all of them were cursed by the Brahmanas, and as a result, they all became intoxicated with wine made of putrefied rice and fought among themselves with sticks, not even recognizing one another. Now all but 4 or 5 of them are dead and gone.
Actually, this is all due to the supreme will of the Lord, the personality of Godhead. Sometimes people kill one another, and at other times they protect one another.
A king, as in the ocean, the bigger and stronger part swallow up the smaller and weaker ones. So also the supreme personality of Godhead, to lighten the burden of the earth, has engaged the stronger leader to kill the weaker and the bigger daddy to kill the smaller.
The Supreme Unborn, Lord Shri Krishna, calls the members of the Yadu dynasty to relinquish their bodies, and thus he relieved the burden of the world. His action was like picking out a thorn with a thorn, though both are the same to the controller.
Now I read the Sanskrit of the. Okay, I'll focus on verse 24. Prayenaitad Bhagavata Ishvarasya Vichestitam Mito Nignanti Bhutani Avayanti Chayanmitha Prayenaitad Bhagavata Ishvarasya Vichestitam Mito Nignanti Bhutani Avayanti Chayanmitha Prayenaitad Bhagavata Ishvarasya Vichestitam Mito Nignanti Bhutani Bhavayanti Chayanmitha
Ishvarasya Vichestitam Nignanti Bhutani Bhavayanti Chayanmitha Ishvarasya Vichestitam Nignanti Bhutani Bhavayanti Chayanmitha Bhagavata
Ishvarasya Vichestitam
Nignanti Bhutani Bhavayanti Chayanmitha Bhagavata Ishvarasya Vichestitam Nignanti Bhutani Bhavayanti Chayanmitha.
Together, okay. Of the personality of Godhead,
Ishvarasya of the Lord, Vichestitam, let it go. Mita one another, Nignanti tuyo, Utani Tadiminis, Magayanti, and also protect, Cha also Yat Kabun, Mita one another.
Translation and purport by Zoran Vishilesi. Factually, this is all due to the supreme will of the Lord, the personality of Godhead. Sometimes people kill one another, and at other times they protect one another. Purport. According to the anthropologists, there is nature's law of struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. But they do not know that behind the law of nature is the supreme direction of the supreme personality of Godhead. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is confirmed that the law of nature is executed under the direction of the Lord. Whenever, therefore, there is peace in the world, it must be known that it is due to the goodwill of the Lord. And whenever there is upheaval in the world, it is also due to the supreme will of the Lord. Not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Lord. Whenever, therefore, there is disobedience of the established rules enacted by the Lord, there is war between men and nations. The surest way to the path of peace, therefore, is dovetailing everything to the established rule of the Lord. The established rule is that whatever we do, whatever we sacrifice, or whatever we give in charity must be done to the fullest satisfaction of the Lord. No one should do anything, eat anything, sacrifice anything, or give anything in charity against the will of the Lord. Discretion is the better part of valor, and one must learn how to discriminate between actions which may be pleasing to the Lord and those which may not be pleasing to the Lord. An action is thus judged by the Lord's pleasure or displeasure. There is no room for personal whims. We must always be guided by the pleasure of the Lord. Such action is called yoga karmasu kaushala, or actions performed which are linked with the Supreme Lord. That is the art of doing a thing perfectly. Om Gyanatamilandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharani Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshitani Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram. Factually, this is all due to the supreme will of the Lord, the personality of Godhead. Sometimes people kill one another, and at other times they protect one another. So, have you all covered the earlier verses of this chapter? No. So this is a very difficult to sort of digest section because we're trying to understand how is it that the Lord allowed and sort of facilitated the massacre of his entire family. Because that's what happened. And in one of the most brutal ways possible. And I think it's safe and okay. And I think the humble approach to take towards this is that we really cannot understand the mind of God. Because I can think of a dozen different ways that God could have, arranged for his, he could have gotten a bunch of, airplanes, say, everybody just get the heck on, we're going, okay? And he's strong enough to push everybody on a plane and say, get out of here, your time is over, right? He could have hypnotized them all, flew them back, blinked his eye, they could have all disappeared, ended up in Vaikuntha. I mean, there's a gazillion ways I could probably keep going of different ways in which, you have a question already?
Well, just how did it spend?
Okay, well, I'll get to it. Eager, that's good. That's why you're up front. That's good. So there are so many different ways that he could have facilitated the disappearance of his family from this earth. And so when you think about it, at least for me, when I was meditating on this verse, and for the longest time, like, what am I going to talk about here? It's just like the wildest passage in the whole Bhagavatam for the most part, in one sense, the most violent and just bewildering passage. And then I came to the conclusions like, I don't know. It's just, this is what God decided to do. So either we accept that he knows what he's doing, or we choose not to accept that, what he's doing. And then that's up to you between your relationship with Krishna. You can say, Krishna, I love you, and I just, I don't get this. I don't get what you're doing, and then that's okay. And who are we to challenge, right? The way God chooses to manifest things in this world. Like, we could challenge it if we want, and that's okay too. Because obviously Arjuna challenged Krishna quite a few times about his instructions. Even after he heard the Gita, believe it or not, during the battle, he still challenges Krishna when it comes to killing Bhishma. They're having like an argument on the battlefield while he's driving the chariot. Like he was arguing with him multiple times. He's just like, the reality is now I got to shoot at Bhishma. Like, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense. Krishna's like, I already told you that you need to do this, and this is why. Do I need to tell you the whole thing all over again? And he's like driving, and Arjuna's like shooting, and they're arguing. It's a whole thing, It's part of humanity to question and not be sure of why things are being done and said. And so therefore we just have to go deeper. And at certain points, I think we just need to humbly accept that we're not going to understand everything. And that's something Krishna makes clear to Arjuna, even in the 11th chapter where the universal form is revealed. Arjuna's like, I want to see all aspects of you. The 10th chapter or the 11th chapter, I'm not sure. Krishna says, I can't show you everything. I'm unlimited. It's like, if I start telling you about myself, this battle will never begin because I'll just keep talking about myself because there's so much to say. So I'm just giving you what you can handle. And even what we're given here, I don't know if we can handle it. I really don't know if we can handle it. And so how does this come about where his entire family beats each other up into a pulp with metal rods? Right? So how does this even happen? I'm going to just go ahead and read that section of the Bhagavatam that summarizes what happened, because it's a very long story. So I figured I could just read it. By Sri Krishna's desire, many great sages headed by Narada and Vishwamitra assembled at the holy place named Pindarka, near the city of Dwarka. The young boys of the Yadu family, absorbed in a playful mood, also arrived there. So they were kind of wanting to have fun, a little mischief. The sages are there. These boys dressed Samba, who's a son of Krishna, in the guise of a pregnant woman about to give birth, and inquired from the sages about the fruitfulness of Samba's so-called pregnancy. So they dress up Samba as a pregnant woman. Hey, let's go have some fun with these great sages. Because there's nothing else to do today. We got sages here. Let's go have fun with them of all people, right? And that's Krishna's son. So just to show you, in this world, everybody can get bewildered. So the sages cursed the boys by saying, because the sages understood, like, you can't fool these sages. They can see past, present, and future all at the same time. So a little cloth covering a belly is not going to fool them, right? They know that these guys are just having fun. So the sages took it a little more seriously than the kids expected them to. They didn't realize the sages are going to get like full-blown serious in that moment. Sages cursed the mocking boys by saying, she will give birth to a club that will destroy your family. Okay, yes, mic drop for sure. For sure. The Yadus, frightened by this curse, because they now immediately, their intelligence finally kicked in. Before it wasn't fully functioning. Now it kicked in. They're like, oh, wait a second. This is not what we were expecting to happen. Yeah, She will give birth to a club that will destroy your family. The Yadus, frightened by this curse, immediately lifted the garment from Samba's abdomen and found a club. Now that club wasn't there before. Now all of a sudden there was an iron club sitting there. Hurrying to the assembly of Ugrasena, the king of the Yadus, they offered a report of everything that had taken place. At least they had the good sense to go tell him what happened. Fearing the Brahmana's curse, Yaduraj Ugrasena ordered the club ground to powder and thrown into the ocean. Okay, well, if this is supposed to destroy us, let's ground it up and throw it into the ocean. And it's a completely wild story, right? What happens here. Within the ocean, a fish, so they've ground it up and it's in the ocean. A fish swallows the last remaining lump of iron. I guess some part of the lump remained, and a fish swallowed it. And the waves carried all of the bits of the ground powder to the shore. So the rest of the powder ends up on the shore, where they were implanted and eventually grew into groves of cane. So these metal pieces grew into groves like canes, like bamboos, but made of metal. It just gets wilder and wilder. Fishermen caught the fish that had swallowed the lump, and a hunter, they're like, oh, there's a lump of metal, what do we do with it? Well, this one hunter named Jara used that iron lump, found it in the belly, and made an arrow with it. Like somehow he thought, let me go ahead and make an arrow with this, right? Although the Super Soul Lord Sri Krishna understood what was happening, he did not wish to do anything to counteract it. Rather, in the form of time, he sanctioned these events. So what ultimately happens is the whole Yadu family is convinced to go on vacation at that same location where these bamboo iron rods are growing. And they go there and they get drunk and they start offending one another. Then they pull these iron rods out and they start beating each other with them. They get so drunk, so upset, they kill each other with iron rods, right? That's, I don't know, that's pretty brutal right there. You can, right? Yeah, yeah. And so, probably speaking from experience, probably speaking from experience, that's why he ran away from India and came to the US, so they can't find him. Let me hide out in the Krishna house. No one will ever look for me here. So, joking. He's a good guy for the most part. Good guy. So that's kind of, hopefully that kind of answers your, any other, I don't know how I can explain this, but so that's sort of what ends up happening. And so I guess there's several things we can take from this, that really and truly the pastimes of the Lord are quite inconceivable. And that arrow is the arrow that ultimately shoots Krishna in the foot and kills him. Of course, he leaves behind a body, but Krishna doesn't actually die. And the whole thing is just, and this whole part is interesting, that Krishna actually dies from an arrow to the foot. And I've heard some devotees explain, I don't know, it makes sense to me, that Krishna chose to die in such a ridiculous way so that those who didn't want to believe in him had reason to not believe in his divinity. Could a person who from his childhood is killing massive demons, like let's say you believe if you believe the whole Krishna pastime, you believe Krishna's there, right? If you from that point, who killed Putna as an infant, right? A few months old or a few days old, a demon that's like mile long, her head's like in the clouds, literally, right? Literally. Kills her, kills dozens of other demons throughout his life, powerful demons that could conquer the planet. And then he gets killed by an arrow to the foot. And while he's on the battlefield also, he's getting shot at the whole time. He's the one that's up front, getting shot at. There, you can imagine they're trying to shoot him too. You want to take out the warrior, take out the driver and the horses, right? So that's happening constantly. Nothing happens. And not just that, there are some very powerful warriors shooting nuclear weapons at him and he doesn't die. And now an iron arrow is supposed to kill him on the foot. Like you could wrap that up and just put on a cast and you'd be fine. I think most of us would survive an arrow to the foot. So when you look at the whole thing, but he wanted to give something to those who don't believe in him. and his pastime. Say, okay, here, I'm going to leave this pastime for you, and you can latch onto this for the rest of your life. Say that, hey, Krishna was an ordinary person, and you look how he died. He died like an ordinary person. When he couldn't even die like an ordinary person as an infant. Taking into the Trinavarta, taking him to the sky, like none of that killed him, but an arrow killed him, right? So Krishna always likes to give us, according to our faith. For those who don't want to believe in him, it's like here's how I died, and for those who do, you can understand the bigger picture. So I think we have to choose what we accept and how we want to accept it, and that Krishna will do a lot of inconceivable things. And that's sort of the beauty of God. Because if he did things that were conceivable, then that wouldn't be so interesting. Then we'd be like, okay, so what? If Krishna just took birth, got married, had a few kids, lived like a regular person, that we wouldn't really be inspired to worship. We need something extraordinary for that devotion to be invoked from within our heart. We need something extraordinary. Why should God do anything ordinary? When people become prominent in this world, they become prominent in this world because they do something extraordinary. Something people are amazed by. And then they can look up to them and, like a famous basketball player, a famous football player, a famous musician. They do extraordinary things when they perform at a concert. You have like explosions going off. They're being lowered from a ceiling. They do all kinds of things that, like, wow, to invoke that sort of awe and devotion. So if humans can do that kind of thing, the more powerful you get, the more grand your actions are. The more people end up talking about your actions. You have the whole world talking about your actions, the grander you are. So who's the grandest of them all, right? It's God, it's Krishna. So why should his activities be simple and lack complication? They should give us something to talk about thousands of years later. We should still be mesmerized by those actions. Most of the historic figures, we've kind of forgotten about the grand things that they've done. Maybe you'll study them in school, but then you forget about it later. But God's pastimes, we're going to keep talking about this pastime. And just us using our mind and intelligence to debate this in our own mind, the beauty is we're getting purified. By thinking about this, by talking about it, by hearing about it, every time we do, in a healthy, positive way, it leads to our mental and emotional and purification. It's happening every single time. And it's okay to, like for me, I understand that doesn't make any sense for me, right? How this happened, why he chose this way. But ultimately, who am I? Right? In my minuscule capacity to understand things of this world, who am I to question the reasoning and the intellect and the mind of God and why he chooses to do things in a certain way? If I have the capacity to create universes, then maybe I could challenge it more. Like, hey, okay, I'm pretty brilliant. Look, I've created a few universes. So Krishna, why are you doing this? I barely create anything. So I think when we don't have that capacity, but I think it's still okay to challenge and question. Nothing wrong with it, just in a healthy way. And then say, hey, either you choose to disbelieve the thing, or you choose to suspend your disbelief and say, hey, I'm going to accept it. Maybe someday Krishna will reveal. Just like Krishna revealed to Arjuna his universal form, there's no way Arjuna himself could have figured out what that form looked like. Impossible. Krishna's like, well, I'm going to give you, even though you're my very close friend, cousin, and all of that, you're not going to see this form until I allow you to see it. And Arjuna took a humble position in his mind and his heart. So Krishna's like, okay, here you go, check it out. Be mesmerized. So the only way we fully get it is the only person who holds the key is Krishna, who can unlock it if he chooses to do so, and for those who chooses to do it for, chooses to do it for. So it's fully his sort of prerogative. He decides. And if we really want to know, then we have to become humble. But there are so many other simpler pastimes to focus on. The other aspect of this chapter that I really like, which has probably been spoken on, but I'm going to speak on it again, because you can speak on it as many times as you want to, is just the previous section of this chapter. I think it's such a beautiful section. Because Arjuna has just come back from, and Yudhishthira Maharaj is waiting for Arjuna to come back. It's been months, he hasn't come back. Arjuna comes back, and he says that Arjuna's mouth, due to grief, Arjuna's mouth and lotus-like heart had dried up, and his body had lost all luster. He could hardly utter a word in reply. With great difficulty, he checked the tears of grief and smeared his eyes. He was very distressed because Lord Krishna was out of his sight, and he increasingly felt affection for him. So he just lost his good friend Krishna, best friend Krishna, cousin Krishna. And what I really like about this section here is, so it's interesting, this chapter has such two extreme sections. One is Arjuna mourning and grieving, and the other is about this brutal fight and massacre. All within one chapter, where you go from like his grief and emotional state to like, whoa, like, you know, like a sort of like a slow-paced romantic drama or some kind of drama turning into like a horror movie all at once. You know, you're like, well, I didn't expect this to show up in the same chapter. But what I wanted to also talk about, and I was appreciating, so we know Arjuna, for the most part, from reading the Gita and the Mahabharata, like what are some traits of Arjuna that you would use to describe him? If somebody asked you about Arjuna, right, somebody who wasn't really familiar with Krishna consciousness, what are some phrases you would just, how would you describe Arjuna? Yeah. Faithful, okay.
He's a warrior who has a sense of duty, and he is also very spiritual.
Okay, warrior with a sense of duty and spiritual.
He's committed to morality and is very deeply reflective and inquisitive, and ultimately he takes shelter and follows God.
Okay, really good, yeah. Anyone else?
Committed to keeping his word.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Even under fire.
Yeah. Rare to find those kinds of personality. Yeah.
Compassionate.
Okay.
He's talented.
Talented, for sure. Yeah. Did you have something?
He's like an unstoppable force.
Yeah.
He can do anything.
Yeah.
In the realm of like war and also dancing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah.
He's the best archer.
He's the best archer.
Whose gloves are made of people
Is that a factor? Okay, well, there we go. Learn something new every day, every single day. So he's an amazing, so basically the first things, right? It's like we know him as all of these things, as a fierce, mighty, fearless warrior. One thing that, faithful, keeps his word, great archer, he's an unstoppable force, all of these things. One thing that we don't usually identify him as being vulnerable, right? I was wondering if somebody would say that. He's vulnerable. Very publicly vulnerable. Like we're reading about his vulnerability 5,000 years later. He was vulnerable on many occasions. Before the battle, like full-blown crying in front of a bunch of like dudes ready to fight. That's not a place where a guy wants to cry. Okay? You're about to play football or basketball. You're like, I'm really missing my mom. Like, that's just not the place you would do it. Like, honestly, I think a guy would rather like jump off a building than cry in front of other guys. It's just a thing that with guys, whether it's the right thing or the wrong thing, it's probably not the right thing or the best thing. But that's just how we're wired, and society wires us to not show that vulnerability. And he's about to do that, and not just in front of some dudes. They're the most powerful people, warriors on the planet. Like, just incredible, and they're all focused. They're ready to fight. There's nothing else on their mind. There's nothing on their to-do list other than to fight and win. And in the middle of that, he's breaking down, thinking about how it's going to impact society as a result of this battle, and what's going to happen to the women that are going to be left behind, what's going to happen to the children that are going to be left behind. Thinking of that, he starts crying. He's not callous, he's not indifferent, he's not just cold, that he's ready for battle and blood. No, he's recognizing what's going to happen to society. Like, that's a pretty deep thing to think about. And what to speak of that? And now here, at the end of the whole thing, when Krishna is gone, he's trying hard to check his tears. And he is now remembering. He's like, with great difficulty checked the tears of grief that smeared his eyes. He was very distressed because Lord Krishna was out of his sight. And he increasingly felt affection for him. So he's getting very emotional in front of Yudhishthira Maharaj, and I don't know who else was in that assembly. There's usually some other people in the assembly as well. And he's not afraid to show that he is sad. He's just not afraid to show that he's sad. As a fiercest warrior on that, one of the fiercest warriors on the planet, he's not afraid to show his emotions and his vulnerability. And I think that's a very powerful thing that I think just it's overlooked about Arjuna. And even about Yudhishthira. When it was time for him to rule, he said, I don't want to sit on a blood-stained throne. Right? He's like, everybody died for this throne, I have to sit on it. It's like blood-stained. And he was very emotional too. But I think that that's something that we perhaps forget. I mean, I guess maybe possibly I'm speaking a little more to like the male energy in the room. Because I think for women, it's much easier to show their emotions and sort of get it out. And I think for men, we hold it in. And I think there's a reason why more men have heart attacks than women do. Because it's like you can only hold in so much before it blows up on you. Right? And that's true. More men, will have heart attacks than women will, because so many emotions you hold in. It's just not cool to cry. I remember like a couple times, like I'm watching like a movie, it's like a sad movie, and I want to cry. Even if I'm by myself, I'm just gonna like suppress all my tears. I'm not gonna cry right now. I really should, but I'm not going to. And then I'm like thinking, like, man, this is so crazy that I'm like afraid to use the tear ducts that God has given me. Like they're meant to let out stuff, and you're holding it in. It's not good. It's supposed to come out, and you're saying I'm not going to. I remember one time I was on a plane and watching a movie. It turned out to be a really like, I don't even remember which movie. I was trying to remember which movie. It was like really moving. It's like some kind of like a documentary based on a true story. And I got so emotional. I had people sitting next to me. I was like ready to burst out crying, but I just like held it in like you won't believe. I thought it was gonna like something was gonna explode. I got so emotional watching this. I was trying to remember the movie, but I can't. And I'm just like, yeah, I've just suppressed and so on. I'm just like, I wonder if I'm just going to blow up one day, because I've suppressed so many emotions. So I think if we want to take something from Arjuna, right, we can take all of the things we talked about, true to his word, fierce warrior, faithful, all of these things are great, I think, right? But I think it's also important to take this part from him, about him being able to show that he's vulnerable. in a genuine way, in an honest way, right? Not trying to get attention or anything, because we could do that too, right? Really do it in an honest way, because what is bhakti? If we're not able to soften our heart, are we really going to be able to open up to bhakti? Right? I'm sure you've all heard this story, but I'll share it again and as clear as I remember it, and I think I'll probably make a few mistakes, where there's this ashram of this guru. One person comes in to the ashram, said, I want to join your ashram. And he said, I know I lost my wife, I've lost my kids, I'm all alone, and I'm not crying for them. I think I'm detached enough to join your ashram. He said, well, go back, you're not qualified right now. Later, another person comes in, it's like falling apart. I lost my wife, lost my kids, crying, just a full-blown mess. Like, I'd like to join your ashram. He says, yes, you're welcome to join the ashram. And of course, the residents, the brahmacharis are confused. Well, this person seems like a full-on mess. The other one was so detached. The guru, and it's like, why'd you let this one in and not the other one? And the guru said, well, this one has already learned to love and to cry. Yeah, she should put it. So because this one has already learned to love and mourn, we just have to turn that towards God. Like, take that mourning towards God. Whereas the other one, so proud that he's not crying for his wife and kids, losing them, that it's going to be hard to break that ice. Right? That's a thick block of ice. And so it's going to be easier to train this one than that one. So, and I think we really do, with all the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita and Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's so filled with detachment and renunciation that takes so much prominence in our mind, because we want to believe that spirituality and a spiritual advancement is synonymous with renunciation. Like, we want to believe that. And not just we, that's just kind of how the world is. Like, renunciation means you're getting closer to God. But I think we're misunderstanding renunciation. I think, or we have an extreme understanding of renunciation. Oh, renouncing family, renouncing household life, renouncing money. Converts didn't renounce money or household life. They were living large. They had mansions and they had, everything. But when we look at our lineage, the Goswamis are living under trees, so we think we want to live like the Goswamis. But see, that's a misunderstanding right there. Because we can't really live like them. So we're trying to artificially live like them. Well, we can't do that. Better we focus on becoming vulnerable like Arjuna. He's just crying. He's a mess. He's missing his friend. And he's fine crying about it in front of his brother. And they're both probably crying together because Yudhishthir's sad too. He's already picked up on it. He's like, did your friend Krishna leave? Is he gone? And I think that is a very important component here that I'd like to sort of bring in from the Goswamis, where Rupa Goswami says, offering gifts in charity, accepting charitable gifts, revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially. The same hardcore renunciates are telling us this. And this is what we need to pay attention to, not living under a tree. That's the message we should be paying attention to, not necessarily focusing on eating less and living under a tree and not wearing any clothes and living very austere and getting sick. That's not the point. That's not what they're trying to demonstrate. This is it right here. That revealing one's mind in confidence, inquiring confidentially. Arjuna's doing that exact thing with Yudhishthira Maharaj right now. That's what he's doing. He's revealing his mind in confidence. He's revealing his heart in confidence to Yudhishthira Maharaj and fully opening up his heart to Yudhishthira Maharaj because they just lost a loved one. And that it's okay to cry about that. And if you're feeling sad, it's okay to cry about it. I think we get so caught up in the renunciation aspect in Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and even in broader Hinduism, that we forget the heart and the devotional and the vulnerability aspect and component of our practice, which is a key aspect, because without that, we won't be able to absorb power. Right? Without that, it won't really sink in. If we just walk around trying to be renounced and detached and not cultivate the love and vulnerability and openness within our heart, it will be hard for us to absorb power. And revealing one's mind in confidence, inquiring confidentially, that requires trust. The foundation of that, that's only going to be possible if we have trust. Because you don't want to be opening up to anyone and everyone. For sure. Even within a small community, you have to find the right person, a person you can actually trust. Somebody you know who's not going to start chit-chatting about what you just said over a really nice plate of prasadam, because that can happen. So that requires trust. And in order for trust to happen, there has to be an investment of time and energy into figuring out who are those people that you can really have a trusting relationship with. It really requires a lot of investment of time. And a lot of times we're not willing to do that. Because we're so busy with this service, with that project, and this and this and this. Just chanting and dancing for kirtan is not necessarily helping you develop that one-to-one relationship, by the way. Cutting potatoes in the kitchen is nice, but it's not where you're necessarily going to develop the deep level of relationship that you're going to be able to cry to somebody, or especially a guy to another guy. That's very hard. You come to that point, there's something deep happening there. And I'm, like I said, I already revealed my own tendencies to hide that. But I'd love to be able to come to that point. And I think it would be so healthy for us, for individuals as a movement, to focus on this aspect a little bit more in depth of Arjuna, the one we glorify as a warrior, as the faithful one, as the best friend of Krishna, but also like the vulnerable component. And I think that's really, really important. And that to not forget that balance as we practice and chant and we give to others. What are we giving to others? What are we giving to others? Whatever's in our heart. So if it's just renunciation and detachment, maybe they'll like it, maybe they won't. I think the heart component, when people feel that, is going to be much more attractive. So, okay, it's 8:30. I'll stop there. We have time for questions, I guess. Few? Okay. Well, 2 hands are up simultaneously, so whoever wants to go first. Okay, whoever, I don't know whoever wants. You guys call it out.
Last night I kept talking.
I wanted to speak on the vulnerability aspect. It's kind of hard for me, or weird for me to share this, but there was one time I was in a boxing ring, and my trainer said something to me that made me have like a realization, and I started crying, and that was the best I ever fought. So, wow. And I was crying while I was fighting, and so it made me think about like Arjuna, because when you said that, sorry, I had it, but then his emotions were tied in with his convictions for the fighting, and he had a realization, and that made him fight even like better. I would imagine. I don't know.
That was a powerful share. Thank you for sharing that. That is a very vivid image, yeah.
Thank you so much. Can I ask a question, like little comment and short story?
Question and?
Question, comment, and short story.
All that?
Yeah.
I guess,
super quick.
Okay, sure, I guess so.
Yes, story. I really want to reflect about you're saying about renunciation, I heard once His Holiness Indrajumna Swami being approached by his disciple, who'd been for a long time brahmachari. And he said, Guru Maharaj, I would like to take sannyas. And Guru said, really? He said, yes. Okay, this is your sannyas. You go to Mayapur, and there is one lady who have 3 kids and a mother living with her. You marry her, this will be your sannyas. And disciple actually did it. And little comment is just reflecting how Bhagavatam, there's so many like curse and offense and rectification and forgiveness, starting with Sutta Goswami's father who been cursed, and then Sutta Goswami said in Vyasasana, and we know the history of Shringi, who cursed Parikshit Maharaj, and then there's Lord Shiva and Prajapati Daksha, and then it goes towards Shishupal, and there's Lord Indra offending his guru. And my question is, there's intentional, unintentional offenses we can make, and how we can rectify that. And also, the second part of the question, like, it's really which is difference between Brahmanas and other section of society who have this quality of forgiveness. And it's not an easy thing to do sometimes. So can you reflect on us?
Well,
and tell us what is the solution?
I didn't understand the second part of your question about the Brahmanas.
I heard that Brahmanas, how they're different from everyone else, they have quality of forgiveness. They can forgive. Like anyone else, they can forgive and have this mercy. So, I don't know,
yeah, I mean, well, Brahmanas, yeah, so the first thing is, in terms of cursing, I think the best way to deal with that, or offenses, right? The first thing is to acknowledge that you did offend. Without that, there's no second step, really. Otherwise, you're just moving through the world like, hey, nothing happened and I was right and they were wrong. Right? That's the story we can tell ourselves. And so the first thing is obviously to fully and deeply acknowledge what you did and feel bad for it. There should be remorse attached to it, like, man, I really messed up and I really hurt this person. Step 2, ask forgiveness, right? In a genuine and humble way. Whether that person forgives or not, now it's on them. That's their issue that they have to deal with. If they're having a hard time forgiving, it could be other issues, or it could just be that if the offense was so bad that they're not able to. You did your part, and that's all you can do, right? And that's all you can do, and then you can be creative. Maybe you can find a way to serve that person after some time has passed, maybe in the while you just need to kind of get out of their face for a little bit, and then try again after some time. But I think Krishna sees your intention, your humility, and that's all we can really do. And try not to repeat that mistake again. And so in terms of Brahmanas, one of the qualities of a Brahmana is to be able to forgive. But this is Kali Yuga, and we all get influenced by anger and can't always control it, right? And so that's what I can say, right? It's Kali Yuga, so it's not always going to be easy to forgive, for us to forgive others. And it's such a deep conversation what it even means to really forgive someone. Like, what does that mean? I'm sure that there's a whole seminars that can be done about that topic. But the best thing is, if you can forgive, if you've been offended, then you can forgive. You realize your heart's still in pain, you're still angry, and maybe you just need some time. So I'll forgive. I know that this person acted because of the influence of the modes of nature. You can use some philosophy, but ultimately it doesn't resolve the issues of the heart. Philosophy can help you for a few moments up here, but the pain will stay as long as it's supposed to. And then you can also ask yourself, like, why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? Is it just my karma coming back? You can ask yourself, but sometimes just time has to go by before things that can heal. Yes.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much for such a lovely class. A quick reflection, and then I have a question. But a reflection was, I think recently there's been a lot more space created by women to talk about our feelings in these quote unquote safe spaces. And sometimes I've observed when those things happen, there's men that are saying, oh, why don't we have these spaces? And truly, as women, we can't hold those spaces for men. And so I just want to say thank you so much for holding this space and opening this conversation, and sharing as well from your experience and perspective. Thank you so much. And so on this theme of the foundation of sharing from the heart confidentially, requiring trust, knowing that, how can we develop trust in spaces that may have let us down in the past by their lack of vulnerability?
Yeah, so if we've been let down, obviously there's going to be a wall or two that we have put up to protect ourselves from being hurt again. Obviously, we can't spend the rest of our life with a wall, walking around with a wall. That is super unhealthy, right? That means that lack of trust will affect everything. Your friendships, your romantic relationships, your relationship with your kids. It's just never going to end. So we have to acknowledge that this is an unhealthy wall that psychologically, subtly I created. And now I need to heal from that and move forward. Because first we have to acknowledge that if I don't fix this, it's literally going to stay with me as I move through different phases of my life. And that means, let's say you go to your workplace, you're not going to trust your colleagues. They're going to isolate you. You're going to leave your job, get fired. Like, it's going to affect your relationship with your spouse, your kids. You're always going to doubt your spouse. You're always going to doubt your kids. You're not going to place faith in them and trust them. In subtle ways, it's going to keep showing up. So just know, like a tail, it's going to be following you around for the rest of your life. And so you have two choices, just to like either get more bitter about it, like, no, I'm not trusting him, forget it. I've lost faith in humanity. We could have that, and then it follows you around literally with everything. You have a hard time with friendships. Anytime the friend doesn't do exactly what you expect, you lost your trust, lost your faith, forget that. Could have been an innocent mistake, but now we just cut ourselves off, and we cause more pain in our heart to ourselves by breaking off that other relationship. So if we can acknowledge that this is a really, that this is something I need to work on, that's when the process begins. And we may need some kind of therapy for that. We may need a mentor for that. Probably we will. Need somebody to guide us through that trust that was broken and that we were hurt. Because a lot of times it's very hard for us to overcome, if you want to use the word trauma or pain from the past or broken trust, it's a lot of times it's very hard for us to overcome it on our own. It's like we have guides for everything in life. For spirituality, we have multiple people who are our guides. If you want to play a musical instrument, you have a guide. If you want to play sports professionally, you have a guide. You want to learn math, science, biology, all these things, you need teachers for pretty much everything you do. We've needed somebody had to teach us how to put on our shoes and put on our pants and tie our shoelaces and put on our shirt. And so we've had somebody teach us everything. So when there's something very painful, trauma, or maybe not that level, but whatever it is, it requires sometimes outside help to help us get over that. Because we're so thick in it, into that pain, that we are not able to like pull ourselves out of it. Like when you're stuck in like quicksand, you kind of need someone else to like help you, at least nudge you to get out. So, I would say that if there is something like that, knowing the significance of it and how disastrous it can be for the rest of our life, better to seek help to deal with it now before like we keep hurting, because ultimately we're going to keep hurting ourselves from our own lack of trust that was broken by 1, 2, or 3, or 4 people. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can I have a quick clarifying?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. What about in like specific scenarios or environments where you're like, okay, I know this isn't going to last forever, but at least for the next like 4 or 5 months, I'm still with these same people. How can we like more specifically, like even really get in there?
I think the same thing. If there's a struggle and you're not able to overcome it, you have to find someone. You've got to find someone, whether it's in the community or outside. Sometimes outside can be even better because they have no connection to it and they can be very objective. It could be a devotee, it could be not a devotee as well. If there's a I mean, you're not only going to go to a devotee dentist, you're going to be happy. You get my point. I'm not going to this lawyer unless they're a devotee, right? So people are professionally trained to help you through certain things. So it could be outside. I find that could be better because they're not in the thick of it. And they can look at it objectively. If there's a vested interest, they may or may not be able to give that objective. May or may not. So I don't want to make an absolute statement. But sometimes it's easier when there's a little distance from someone that like, oh, and they can just help you see things with clarity that like, oh, yeah, I never thought about it. Yeah.
Yes. Question. So I really want to thank you for pointing out that we miss Arjuna's vulnerability, because I certainly did. And I was like, oh, she's right. So thank you for that point. Something that I've been thinking about, is systemically at this particular point in history, we do need people to be vulnerable. And the truth is that the ratios of people who are capable of vulnerability and people who are capable of coaching and vulnerability are by and large in women's bodies.
Yeah.
And so we have this systemic issue where it's like there's this vast resource that we have. And I've actually also heard from some of the young men in this community and also from communities elsewhere that sometimes it's actually difficult to learn vulnerability from other men because there is this systemic issue. And yet in ISKCON and in, Vaishnavism in general, there's this rule where it's like, don't even be alone with your own mother because, women are so tempting.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I guess I apologize, it's taking me a little while to get to the point, but my question is like, what is the role of mothering in ISKCON, like the capacity for the women who do have this capacity to teach this? Because that's the role of mother in the family unit, but we're in a time where the role of mother and father is broken, for a lot of people. Most people don't grow up in Vaishnav families where you have the capacity to sit with the mother who can be like, okay, you need to be like Arjuna, and Arjuna is vulnerable. So like, just from your perspective, is there any room for that in ISKCON based on the way that we handle gender?
Like women
teaching men how to be vulnerable.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's true. I think, obviously women are definitely much better equipped to teach vulnerability, obviously. How to do that, I think there is probably some caution to that as well, because anytime or oftentimes it can happen that if there's too much intimate revealing of the mind, something else could develop between a man and woman. It's just pretty natural. So I think that has to be taken into consideration. We also can't ignore biology, right? And human emotions. Anytime you feel very connected emotionally, something romantic can happen. It's happened between male gurus and female disciples decades. So I think, I don't know if I have an answer to that right now. Like, how do we do that now? Probably in a public setting, it could be facilitated more. Maybe in a small group setting, possibly one-on-one as well, depending on the relationship and everything like that. So, but I do think that having like groups where men those who realize the importance of it, that they come together if they feel the importance, and having those discussions, even men amongst each other, like, hey, how do we do this? Like, okay, let's open up. Let's talk about the pains we've been through with each other. But again, it has to be such a confidential setting before it, because you start opening up, people start like letting everything out. And there's a lot to let out. There's a lot we've kind of boxed up and just kind of kept inside. So I think it would be healthy in I don't want to use the word control way, in some kind of a setting where men are learning to do this. And maybe we learn it, the system on how to do it through a mature lady, and then they try to apply that in a healthy way. Again, it's very complicated. There's no like immediate solution, but I think those who want to, I think, will take the steps to move forward. Huh? Okay, so last thing, okay.
Yeah, really quick, because it's such a wonderful question. And I think this highlights the importance of us as a society to encourage and empower our ladies to take on the role of the world. Because from that point, I think it's way easier to manage yogi as you keep control, regulating that only relationship with these parents is essentially needed.
Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki,
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Jai Gaur Premanandi.
Go! Parvusani Govinde, Namo Brahmani Vaishnave, Samapunya Vishwasana